Stranger, this is like the old days.
This is like the old days, yeah.
Ottoman is back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you drive that?
Oh, yeah.
See more people walking in. Well, let's kind of get started here. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome. We have Hannah and Alicia from the International Crane Foundation with us this evening to talk to us about saving cranes. And let's see, Alicia earned her bachelor's from the University of Wisconsin in Madison in 2022, and Hannah from Utah State, same year. Hannah interned at Reggie, our friends at Reggie, and is now at ICF, the International Crane Foundation. So, yeah. Hannah is also, she says she's very passionate about conservation, and Alicia enjoys her role at the International Crane Foundation because it allows her to spend time in nature, solve complex problems, and interact with members of the public. So we welcome them both this evening. They'll tell you more about themselves and a lot more about cranes. After the program, we have some snacks and tea and cider. And then I'm going to tell you about this full slate of field trips and other things we're doing this spring before we see you off. So there's a lot going on. But Ann Graham and I were just saying that, you know, what a great turnout. You know, it's like we're back to post-COVID numbers or pre-COVID numbers. So it's great to see all of you here. So that's really great program. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, hi, everybody. Good evening. So first of all, thank you for having us here to speak to you all today. My name is Alicia, and I am joined today by Hannah. We work as Crane Conservation Fellows at the International Crane Foundation. You want to talk a bit more about what that means?
Yep, so that means that we assist in the research and monitoring of our wild populations of cranes that are found here in Wisconsin. So that includes our sandhill crane and our whooping crane. And when we're not in the field or in our lab, we get to come give talks to groups like you, so we can allow you to get to better know our cranes and the conservation we're doing for them.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we'll be presenting on today. We're gonna talk about a little bit about ICF and the International Crane Foundation's history, and then we're gonna move on to talking about whooping cranes, which can be found in here in Wisconsin. We're gonna talk about their history and then the ongoing conservation or reintroduction work that we do to protect them. So first, Hannah's gonna start us off by giving some more history of ICF and what we do.
So the International Crane Foundation, headquarters in Baraboo, Wisconsin, is located within the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk people. We acknowledge and honor the Ho-Chunk people as caretakers of the land and water since time immemorial, and as our neighbors, friends, and vital members of our community. So the International Crane Foundation is dedicated to amplifying local voice and perspective in all the places where crane stands.
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Oh, yes. So the International Crane Foundation was an idea born in 1971 of two Cornell University graduates. Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Getting a little ahead of myself. Dr. George Archibald is on your right, and Dr. Ron Sowie is on your left. Together, they envisioned an organization that would combine education and research along with captive breeding, reintroduction, and landscape restoration to safeguard the world's 15 crane species. In 1973, the International Crane Foundation was hatched in Baraboo, Wisconsin on the old Sowie family horse farm.
They don't have any land.
And since 1973, the International Crane Foundation has grown to be so much more.
Slides are so much better when you don't get light.
So our mission today includes working worldwide to conserve cranes, the ecosystems, watersheds, and flyways on which they depend. From this image, you can see how vast ICF's mission is, as cranes can be found all over the world. They inhabit 5 out of 7 continents, and their flyways cross the borders of many countries. You can see how truly intentional and international our scope of work is, and in a sense of how unifying it is, as our partnerships that we have developed are essential to safeguarding the future of all species of cranes. In the EMP, or the Eastern Migratory Population, as which you'll come to know later, we are mainly focused on the success of the reintroduced whooping crane. So, to set the scene, let's say your group of birders just arrived before dawn at the wetland, and from the misty pools, you hear a distant call.
It is a big group of people.
This guard call is one of two distinct vocalizations that whooping cranes make to communicate. These calls carry for miles and are the first thing you will notice about cranes, as you will often hear them before you ever see them.
Hannah, some people are saying they're having trouble hearing,
Oh,
so I just want to speak up a little bit.
okay,
We had trouble miking because then they couldn't hear it over Zoom. So
okay. So really speak up.
these things here hanging are microphones.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
direct your sound towards that, I guess.
Okay. So like I said, these calls are the first thing you will notice about whooping cranes, as you will often hear them before you ever see them. This guard call is used to alert visitors that these birds are on the landscape and to make their presence known. The second call is the unison call, which it is used primarily by mated pairs, and it helps strengthen their pair bonds and defend their territory and threaten away predators. Fun fact, the males will usually call first and then the female will respond. So as I play this, try and listen out to which one is the male and which one is the female. There's one there. That was the guard call again. Apologies. So as the sun continues to rise and the morning fog evaporates, you may see white blobs starting to move across the landscape. As North America's tallest bird, whooping cranes stand at 5 feet tall. Their long legs help to keep their bodies dry and above water when foraging in their wetland habitats. And the whooping crane is a wetland-dependent species. So this means that they rely on ecosystems to provide access to food, water, protection from common predators, and a safe place to raise their colts. Aside from their long legs, whooping cranes can be identified by their large white bodies, the featherless red patch on their crown, and a black mask that starts around this featherless red patch and extends below their jaw. During flight, these birds can be identified by 3 main attributes: their long trailing legs, their outstretched neck, and black wingtips on either side of their 7 to 8 foot wingspan. So now that we've talked about adults, we should talk about juveniles. Juveniles are on the landscape from late spring through early fall and can get easily confused with adult sandhill cranes, which is understandable when you first view them at a distance, as you see in this picture. But there are 3 main attributes we use to identify them or distinguish them from their sandhill counterparts. So first, the cinnamon head. Sandhill cranes also exhibit a cinnamon rusty coloring, and that's from painting with iron-rich oxidized mud. But they don't reach their head because they can't get their beak to reach the tops of their heads. So juveniles will always exhibit a cinnamon top head that usually fades throughout the first year of life. They also exhibit a pink or gray beak. It hasn't darkened yet, the same way that their parents or adult sandhill cranes have. And lastly, they have a mottled white and cinnamon body. This is a little bit harder to tell, especially in flight or in low light conditions, but they have this stark white feather plumage that comes in throughout their first year and distinguishes them on the landscape as a juvenile rather than that slated gray that you'll see from the sandhill crane adults. So as previously mentioned, you will often hear whooping cranes before you see them, and juveniles are no different. Their call is more like a peep or a chirp throughout the summer and fall. So if you ever get to see them on migration or anything, keep an eye and an ear out for them, as you'll often hear them peeping or chirping in the large gathering flocks rather than calling like their parents do. So now that we know how to properly identify adults and juveniles, we can talk about some birds that are commonly misidentified as whooping cranes, especially in flight. So as you all know, as birders, there is a satisfaction when you correctly identify a species of bird, but in the case of whooping cranes, it is equally as important. Knowing when you're seeing a whooping crane, it helps us in when you're reporting sightings, which we'll talk about later, and to decrease accidental take. We'll go through a couple of examples up here that from a distance or in low light conditions, especially like in the wetland scenario, these birds could easily be mistaken for a whooping crane. So first is our American white pelican. As you can see in flight, he has a short neck and short legs. Our great egret has a short neck and white wingtips. Our snow goose is most commonly misidentified from great distances because they also exhibit a little bit of an outstretched neck and those black wingtips. But again, they have too short of legs, and when they're up close, they're not 5 feet tall and as big as our whooping cranes. And then our great blue heron also is frequently misidentified because of those long trailing legs and the darker plumage on the feathers. But because of its short neck, always keep an eye out for that long outstretched neck versus the short that are seen in the egrets, the pelicans, and the herons. But most commonly misidentified, of course, is our sandhill crane. So these birds have a gray brown throughout the body and wings, whereas our whooping cranes have that white stark body and then the black tips of the feathers. So now
All right. So now you guys can all identify whooping cranes. We're going to talk a bit more about their history. So this map right here represents whooping crane's historic range. So this would be pre-European expansion into North America. So thinking like pre-1600s. This green represents both their breeding and their wintering grounds. So you can see their range would have stretched all the way from the Arctic down to Mexico and throughout Wisconsin, down south where we are. So during this time, it was predicted that there would have been over 10,000 whooping cranes on the landscape in Wisconsin and North America's lush wetlands and prairies. But unfortunately, by the 1940s, that number had decreased to just about 20 individuals left in the wild. So what caused this dramatic decline? Well, there's a few reasons. Overall, when European settlers moved onto the landscape, they found areas that were lush with resources. And this was at a time where hunting and game laws were rarely enforced and usually ignored. So these practices of unrestrained or unregulated hunting and then general disruption of wildlife continued into the 1800s. It ultimately led to the extinction of some species that we no longer see today, such as the passenger pigeon, and the near extinction of species like the whooping crane. So in addition to unregulated hunting, there was also egg collecting and the millinery trade, which were increasing during this time. So the millinery trade, if you don't know, is the trade of feathers to adorn women's hats. This has since been outlawed, and we're going to talk about some of the laws that have since outlawed this. And then, of course, a major cause of the decline of the whooping cranes and many other species is habitat loss. So in this photo here, you see somebody farming. With the Homestead Act that was passed during European expansion, a lot of wetlands and prairies were converted into agricultural fields or developed areas. So this map right here shows how much wetland acreage has been lost in North America since that time. So each dot on this map represents 20,000 acres of wetlands lost. And since the 1800s in Wisconsin alone, we've lost over 50% of our historic wetland acreage. Many of these Midwestern states throughout whooping crane's flyways have experienced similar losses. And like I said, this is driven by agricultural expansion, urbanization, and pollution. Luckily, people started to notice the decline of whooping cranes and lots of other species that were once common on the landscape. And at this time, there started to be a series of laws that were passed to combat this loss of species. So the first law that I want to talk about, and these are just some major ones, there was smaller laws throughout the way. But the first one in 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was passed. So this prohibits the take, trade, selling of migratory birds or any of their parts. So this would have been the law that would have outlawed the millinery trade. So it's illegal to take feathers or eggs from any migratory birds that are protected under this act. In 1934, the duck stamp was introduced. So this act is put in place, and it's a way to raise funds for protecting wetlands and wild areas that ducks, but also other wetland dependent species like whooping cranes depend on. In 1966, the refuge system was established as a way to conserve natural spaces. So we do have whooping cranes that use refuges and refuge systems. So Necedah and Horicon National Wildlife Refuges in Wisconsin specifically. In 1972, the Clean Water Act passed. So this act put protections against polluting water, including wetlands. Water, that's good for cranes, but it's also good for humans. You know, we depend on wetlands for a lot of our own water sources and flood control. But then most notably, there is the Endangered Species Act, which passed in 1973. Whooping cranes were grandfathered into this act. At the time, there was only about 70 individuals left. So this map right here shows where the whooping cranes can be found today. So first thing I want to point out is you can just see how much that, it's called the historic population or the central flyway. You can see how much that land has decreased. What once was like a wide range that would have reached from the Arctic into Wisconsin is now limited to Wood Buffalo National Park in Canada. And that population goes down to Texas and winters on the coast at Aransas Wood Buffalo. Part of the whooping crane's recovery over time has been reintroductions. So there's two reintroduced non-migratory populations. That's the Louisiana non-migratory and the Florida non-migratory. But I want to focus on a reintroduced migratory population, and that would be the Eastern migratory population, also referred to as the EMP. So those are the birds that get released here in Wisconsin, that can be found here in Wisconsin throughout the breeding season, and they migrate down south. Originally, they were taught to migrate to Florida, but over time, their range has shifted further north. And these days, you can find them wintering in all the way from northern Indiana to northern Alabama. Since 2001, ICF and other crane conservation partners have been releasing whooping cranes into the eastern migratory population. Of course, this takes a lot of work. It doesn't just happen overnight. So I'm going to talk through these steps and how we get from egg to release. So there's many steps in the reintroduction process, but to really oversimplify things, first we're going to start with the eggs. So we get eggs in the captive facility one of two ways. The first way is breeding or artificial insemination of cranes in captivity. Cranes need a strong pair bond to start nesting. They mate for life. But sometimes in captivity, cranes will choose a mate that isn't the most genetically compatible. So all whooping cranes in all captive facilities are part of a genetic breeding program. So we know which cranes will be bred together to produce offspring that is most genetically diverse. So if you think about back in the 1940s, we were down to just 20 individuals. That's known as a genetic bottleneck, and it really decreases the diversity of the species, which is bad because it can introduce novel diseases and it just makes them less healthy. So by using artificial insemination in captivity, we are producing eggs that will be as healthy as possible when we release them in the wild. So that's one way. The second way we get eggs is through a method known as double clutching. And that is when we collect eggs off of nests in the wild. And we do this for a few reasons. But one of the reasons is because of black fly infestation. So at Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, there is a yearly spawn of this avian black fly species. They will pester the adult whooping cranes to the point of nest abandonment. So we go out during that time, once the black flies spawn, and we will collect eggs off the nest. This way, we allow the parents to escape from the black flies. They don't have to worry about staying in the same spot. And also, cranes are well adapted to having to re-nest. So they will lay a second clutch, known as double clutching. So once the first nest has failed, or once we've collected the eggs off of it, they will nest again and they will lay another 2 eggs in a new nest. So this is really a win-win situation. You know, it gives the wild whooping cranes a chance to get away from that infestation and also a chance to hatch their own wild chicks. And at the same time, we're bringing those eggs into captivity that might have been abandoned, and we're raising them for release in the fall. So once we have an egg in captivity, it's going to be incubated for 30 days before it hatches. Ideally, it would be incubated under an adult crane in captivity, but not all cranes are experienced enough to be parents. Some of them can't take care of an egg. And obviously, because we're trying to maximize the amount of birds we're releasing, we have to find different methods. So one of the things we do is we use artificial incubators. This is a photo of one type of incubator that we use on our site. So this type of incubator would be used once a chick has already started hatching. So once it breaks the internal membrane, it'll be transferred into one of these units. This really just provides a humid, a warm, and a very controlled environment, which allows them to hatch safely and under a close eye. This is a replica of a whooping crane egg. So you can see they're rather large. They're also speckled. This is camouflage. So in the wild, whooping cranes would be making nests in wetlands using dead vegetation. So this kind of speckled brown color blends in really well with their nest in the wild. I'm going to play a time lapse now of a cute little chick hatching. So you can see there's some Sharpie on the outside of this egg. That's the day that the egg was laid, so that we can expect about 30 days later, the chick will hatch. So right now, little dude just pushed his way out. So you can see he's just kind of laying there for a bit. This is a really exhausting process, and it can be a pretty long process, but it makes them stronger for it. So we try to avoid intervening if we don't have to. Cranes that are able to hatch out themselves are usually a lot stronger. And once they hatch, this guy's just gonna kind of sit there for a while, get his bearings. And at the same time, this chick is drying out. And that's important because being completely dry will allow the chick to separate fully from its egg. Yeah, it looks like he's finally getting to his feet. So you can see this chick is pretty tiny, just a little bit bigger than this egg, but they actually grow at a rate of 1 inch a day. So in just about 3 months, they're gonna be as tall as their adult counterparts. So we've hatched the chick, hooray, it happened. Next, we gotta raise that chick. So we do that one of 2 ways. The first way is parent rearing. So a whooping crane adult in captivity who has experience with chicks will be given a chick to raise. They will teach it all the proper behaviors like they know to do, natural instinct. But of course, like I mentioned before, we usually have more chicks than we do adult pairs that are able to raise them. So the second method we used is costume rearing, which you can see in this photo here, and I'm going to talk a little more about that. So this is kind of a diagram, the anatomy of our costume. There's a biologist in there, I promise. So this is done to prevent imprinting. Cranes, when they hatch and when they're raised, they'll imprint on whatever is raising them. And when they get older and go into the wild, they think, you know, I must look like whatever my parent looked like. So we want to make sure that they recognize the key features of whooping cranes. So those key features include an all-white body, of course. We have those black wingtips on the end of the biologist's arm. Their other hand acts as a long outstretched neck. And then this puppet, that one looks much nicer than this one. This is our outreach puppet. But they have a movable beak. And this would be held on their arm in an upright position to kind of act as the neck. And they'll mimic behaviors that adult cranes would. These biologists spend a lot of time studying cranes, not only in captivity, but also in the wild, to learn their behaviors. So they'll forage like cranes, they'll make calls like cranes and raise their heads. They'll, you know, run around and flap their wings, all to prepare the chick and to equip it with the behaviors that it will need to survive in the wild. They also don't talk in these costumes. We don't want our chicks to get used to the sound of human voices. We also do that actually when before they're hatched. we won't talk around the eggs because we don't want them to get used to the sound of our voice. And instead we play a contact call or a brooding call. That's a sound that adult cranes make to chicks, and it's kind of just like a comforting, reassurance call. So it's a bit quieter, I think. Try to play that now. Very soothing. I'm gonna play a short video now, and it will show some of our biologists in action, putting on these costumes. Let's see if it.
So they'll be checking out the sky. So.
Caretakers wear special costumes designed to hide the human form to prevent the birds from imprinting on people. Knowing they are cranes and not people helps them survive when they are released near wild cranes. Young birds learn the migration route by following older cranes south.
That is how our cranes are raised in captivity. And they'll be raised in captivity until they fledge or until they're old enough and strong enough to sustain flight. So then in the fall, they'll be released, which we'll get to next. A lot of times, I get a lot of people who kind of chuckle at the costumes. They are very funny, but there's a reason we do it. And this kind of is an example of why we need to do it. So the first reintroduction of whooping cranes actually occurred in 1975. And they were released into what was known as the Rocky Mountain Experimental Flock. So this flock was created when whooping crane eggs were placed into sandhill crane nest in Grays Lake, Idaho. And they were supposed to be cross-fostered by these sandhill cranes, learn the migration route from them, and establish their own population there alongside the sandhill cranes. But unfortunately, what ended up happening with this is when the whooping crane chicks hatched, they imprinted on sandhill cranes. So when they were old enough to mate, they didn't recognize themselves as whooping cranes. So they weren't looking for other mates that looked like whooping cranes. Instead, they were trying to mate with the sandhill cranes, which of course poses an issue for the continuation of the population since they didn't want to mate with each other. So this population was discontinued, or this program was discontinued in 1989, and the last whooping crane in this population was gone by 2002. So this just demonstrates why that costume is so important and why we do what we do. It's taken a lot of years of research and experience, but it works, and it still works today, which is why we continue it. So we got our cranes. They're ready to be released. They're looking big and strong. These are some of the different reintroduction and release methods that we use. So from 2001 to 2016, there was a program known as Operation Migration that used an ultralight aircraft piloted by somebody in one of these costumes, and it would fly the whooping crane juveniles south to Florida. So it would start in Wisconsin at a release site and fly them south to Florida. This posed some issues. Whooping cranes can migrate much faster than somebody can fly one of these, so it required a lot of stops along the way. That's why when the population got large enough, we were happy to retire this program and start some more natural release methods. So today, presently, since 2016, we use a variety of different release methods. They all involve releasing the chicks near adults. So adults that already know the migration route. The idea is the chicks will follow them south, which we have found works. There's two different types of releases that we use today. One is known as a hard release. And that's basically, we take them to the release site and just let them go, let them do their thing. Then the other is a soft release, where we will build a temporary pen at the release site to kind of get them acclimated to their environment. So the type of release we do depends on a lot of things. So it can depend on the release site, how many adults are there and able to guide chicks south. And then also the rearing techniques. So if a chick was parent reared, they're more used to seeing adult whooping cranes. They might have a hard release, whereas a chick that was costume reared probably needs to take some more time to get familiar with the wild whooping cranes. So all of this reintroduction work, it's a really lengthy process, and it's not cheap either. So it's very expensive, and it costs about $100,000 per crane from that initial egg to hatching, raising, and release. But these efforts are not without success. So through this hard work, we have been able to build a population and get more chicks released into the wild, which is very important because the survival rate in the wild is very low, at about 17%. This is a summary of the chicks that hatched in 2023. So in total, we had 14 chicks that hatched in the wild. 3 of those survived to fledging and to their migration. But in addition to that, we had 9 releases last year of whooping crane chicks. So yeah, you can see this map here, they're kind of dispersed, but they're clustered around a few different sites. And I'm gonna focus in on those sites here. So the first is Necedah National Wildlife Refuge. There's White River Marsh State Wildlife Area, and then there's Horicon National Wildlife Refuge. So last year we had 3 whooping cranes that were released at Necedah and 6 that were released at Horicon. Whooping cranes exhibit something called site fidelity, which means they're going to return to the same place year after year. So when we're choosing a release site, it's really important that we're choosing a site that won't only be good for their release, but will be good for the duration of their life and nesting season and migrations in the future. So what makes a site ideal for a whooping crane? First, we're looking for areas that have shallow standing water. ICF and other partners have done lots of habitat suitability studies, and we found that areas with open standing water, typically an inch or 2 below the hock, or that joint you see there, it's technically their ankle joint. That's ideal for cranes. It's not too hard to walk around in, and it also provides protection from mammalian predators. So mammals are naturally deterred from water, and also, you know, if a coyote goes trotting around in the water, it's gonna make a lot of sound. So it's harder to be snuck up on if you're standing in open water. They also prefer areas with emergent grasses. So the combination of these 2 habitat factors provides them with areas that are easy to walk through. They can see all around them, and they also provide them with ample food opportunities. So they will forage and roost in wetlands, so they'll spend the night there. In addition to wetlands, they use uplands and agricultural fields, especially during migration and during the period before migration known as staging. So staging is when they're trying to eat as much as possible before migration. That's probably what we're seeing in this photo here. The idea behind that is there's power in numbers. So if you're trying to eat as much as possible, you want to spend less time looking for predators. Well, if you're with 500 of your closest friends, everybody's looking out for predators, so you can spend some more time foraging on your own. So in uplands and agricultural lands like this, they're probably eating waste grains, insects, and even some small rodents. All crane species, whooping cranes and sandhill cranes, are opportunistic foragers, so they will eat what's in front of them. They're also omnivorous. Another thing that we look for at release sites, or that whooping cranes prefer in their habitat, are really wide open areas. So they're looking to avoid forested areas. Again, this can hide terrestrial predators. And then the other reason they want a wide open area is to avoid collision risk. So you can see in this photo here, or I guess the better thing to say would be you can't see in this photo here, there's no trees in the area, there's no power lines, there's no tall buildings or roads. All of those things would introduce collision risk. And we would run the risk of having impact trauma to these cranes. So all of these features are what make Necedah, Horicon, and White River Marsh ideal release sites. This video right here that's gonna play as I talk through the whooping crane's annual cycle. Those little points just represent whooping cranes throughout the state. So you can see right now they're in Wisconsin. You can expect to find them in Wisconsin from March to November. This will be that time where they're settling down, establishing their territories, and starting to nest and breed. And soon you can see those dots are starting to move around. They're clustering a bit. This would be staging. Whoa, somebody just took off. So that staging period, that's September through October, they're gonna be aggregating in bigger groups. And then migration begins. So migration can take anywhere from a day to 1 week, depending on where the whooping cranes are going. They will stop along different stopover sites during their migration. And they will travel through other areas of Wisconsin and southeast Wisconsin. So, I mean, always keep an eye out for whooping cranes, especially if you're going to one of the aforementioned sites. But especially in the fall, you know, they'll be moving around a lot more. So it could be possible that you'd see them in your area. And I know from looking at our reports, we are in Portage County right now, if I'm not mistaken. In the past 5 years, we've gotten about 70 reports from the general public in Portage County. So you could be the next one. You could be report number 71. And then when they're wintering, they're in Western Indiana, Eastern Illinois, and Northern Alabama at a few major sites. So Goose Pond, Fish and Wildlife Area in Indiana, and then Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge in Alabama. If you ever get a chance to go, I highly recommend going during the winter. Enjoy the warmer weather and see some whooping cranes on their wintering grounds. All birds that are released into the eastern migratory population are banded with a unique color combination. Wild hatch chicks are also banded. There are a few exceptions, but it is the goal to have all cranes banded so that we can tell who the individuals are. Many of them are also banded with what's known as a VHF or a radio transmitter. You can see that in this middle photo here. It's got a little antenna coming off one of its bands. And then one of our volunteers on the right is demonstrating that tracking. So through these bands and through those kind of remote tracking techniques, we're able to, or scientists and also volunteers throughout the flyway are able to track exactly where these cranes are going throughout their life, really. You can see these bands are loosely attached. A lot of times we refer to them as like jewelry or bracelets. They don't constrict the leg. So if you see a whooping crane, like I said, please report it to us. We would love to hear from you. And these are the steps you can take if you think you're looking at a whooping crane. First thing you're going to want to do is confirm you saw a whooping crane using some of those ID tools that Hannah provided us earlier. So you're looking for a large white bird, all white body, black wingtips, long neck, and that red head. So once you confirm, yes, I am looking at a whooping crane, next thing you can do is confirm that there are whooping cranes in your area. So we have this website here, whoopermap.savingcranes.org, which is kind of a mouthful. But if you go there, you'll see this page on the left. And that highlights the counties that whooping cranes were recently reported in. So if your county is highlighted and you're looking at a whooping crane, it's really likely that your report is correct and you are looking at an actual whooping crane. But it could also be possible that you're the first one seeing it, especially in the fall if they're migrating, which is always exciting. So definitely still report it. And then you can report that sighting at bandedcranes.org. And at the end of my presentation, we have little Waterbird ID guides that has this URL on the back. So you can, they're wallet size, you can keep it in your wallet when you go out birding, and go to that website to report any whooping cranes you see. So currently there's about 800 whooping cranes worldwide. That's a lot of progress that we've made in those 70-some years since we were down to just 20 individuals, but we still have a lot more work to go. So you can see the eastern migratory population is represented by that 76. That number fluctuates, but we are at about 70 individuals. This kind of goes to show what can be done when communities, scientists, governments, and just people who care about cranes in general come together to bring back a species from extinction. Whooping cranes were brought back from the brink. But of course, they still face threats today. So this slide highlights some of the continued threats to whooping cranes. A major threat faced by not only whooping cranes, but all species is habitat loss and degradation. So not only does this take away critical area, it can also increase the risk of some of these other factors. Another threat that they face is poaching. This accounts for about 10.5% of known mortalities in this population of whooping cranes. These poaching cases are not related to hunters. They're not related to misidentifications. It's usually purposeful. So our outreach programs are actually one way we're combating this issue. We have found since the beginning of our outreach program, those poaching cases have decreased. So talking to community members and hunters and conservationists alike, It's a way for us to increase awareness and stewardship around whooping cranes. Another threat is low genetic diversity. So we already talked about that a bit. They went through a genetic bottleneck. So they do face some issues in the wild that we're trying to combat through our genetic program in captivity. Predation is actually the leading cause of mortality for this population. It accounts for about 50% of mortalities, 50. And it's really pronounced in juveniles who maybe aren't used to the threat of predators around. The main predators we found are coyotes and bobcats. We have ongoing research at the Crane Foundation, basically to inform what we can do to limit predation. There's been talk of training chicks in captivity to recognize predators or removing vegetation. So maybe in the wild they can see more predators, but that work is ongoing. Disease and illness accounts for about 9% of mortalities in this population. Disturbance, especially at nesting sites, this can just lead to lower nesting success. And unfortunately, usually disturbance is caused by well-meaning people who are in the space of whooping cranes and maybe don't know how close is too close. So whooping cranes are really territorial and they're really sensitive to disturbance. But luckily, you don't have to guess. They will let you know if you're too close. So some behaviors to look for, that guard call that Hannah played earlier. They will also sometimes spread their wings when they're feeling threatened or they want you to back up. They'll raise their head and they'll show this red patch of their crown. So they'll kind of show it off and raise their wings out. And that's when you know you need to take some steps back. So usually we recommend about 200 yards if you're outside of your car. So like 2 football fields and 100 yards if you're within your car. Finally, a threat that accounts for about 19% of mortalities is impact trauma. So this can be caused by vehicles, buildings, but a major source of it is power line collisions. To mitigate this threat, the International Crane Foundation works with energy companies to either bury lines or place flight diverters. And we do have ongoing research to inform how far away from core wetland areas power lines should be placed to limit this threat. So at this point, you might be wondering what you can do to help whooping cranes. Lucky for you, I've come prepared with some ideas. So first thing you can do is know how to identify these cranes and to safely look for them on the landscape. So like I said, keeping your distance, and we'll hand out those ID guides that will help you identify birds. The next thing you can do is to report banded cranes to us at bandedcranes.org. So if you send a report to that website, it's going to get sent directly to our research team. And me, Hannah, or one of our other coworkers will send you a nice email back telling you who the bird was that you saw. Because again, they're all banded, so we do know the individual birds. Next thing you can do is you can always report poaching or harassment of not only whooping cranes, but any wildlife to your local authorities. And in Wisconsin, the DNR has an anonymous tip line. So you can always give them a call to report poaching or harassment. If you are in an area where you frequently see cranes, you can work to protect your local wetlands and uplands and make sure that they're available for cranes. You can talk to your friends, families, and legislators about cranes and about wetlands and why it's important to protect wetlands. So again, wetlands aren't only good for cranes, they're good for us too. And then finally, if you want to learn more about the reintroduction efforts, what we have going on at the International Crane Foundation, how you can visit, and just generally how you can support our work, you can head to savingcranes.org to learn more. So with that, thank you all so much for your patience. I have some time, I think, to answer any questions that anybody might have. Questions? In the back there?
What are the black, you said black flies?
Yeah, black flies.
Historically, was that a problem as well in the
So-
natural populations?
Yeah, it's hard to tell historically. A fly wouldn't preserve great in the record. We do have observations from like the Central Historic Flyway that those cranes don't have a big issue with black flies. I've even heard reports of people seeing them eat black flies off of themselves. So we are hoping that over time, the whooping cranes in this population can kind of adjust to that threat. But yeah, for the time being, that is kind of like a novel threat in this population. Question?
How much time in a 24-hour period does like the costumed foster parent spend with the birds?
Good question. I don't have an exact number for you. I'm personally, thank goodness, not one of the people that's in the hot costume all day. I'm very grateful for that. I'm just looking at them in the wild. I know they do shifts and like they're not with them at night. They kind of like tuck them in at night. Definitely during feeding, so a few times a day. And I know for a few hours a day, they usually take them out and kind of like walk them around. We have a open prairie area. So I would say it's pretty consistent during the first few weeks, and they probably taper off a bit towards the end. Yeah, I don't have an exact number. Anything else? Oh, yes.
Of the 70 to 75 in the Wisconsin population, the eastern migratory population, how many are wild hatched?
Another good question. Not sure. I'm not sure the total number. If I had a moment, I can look on my computer after. I have a list, so I can find a quick number. Yeah, the wild hatch numbers have kind of fluctuated throughout time. So obviously over time, we've gotten more wild hatch chicks. Fledging success is correlated with like parental experience. So hopefully like as the population gets more experience just year to year being parents, we're gonna see more wild hatch chicks. Yeah, I can look that up for you after I'm done presenting here. Yes?
What's the life expectancy of a whooping crane?
That's a good question. So, whooping cranes and other crane species can be expected to live about 20 to 30 years in the wild. In captivity, that life expectancy increases to about 40 to 50 years. And then, this is crazy, but the oldest crane ever recorded was a Siberian crane at ICF named Wolf, and he lived to be 87. So that is a full life.
This part of that eastern migration, do they still go down to the Texas coast, some of them?
So, here, I'll click back. Sorry, bear with me. I just want to point it out on the map. There we go. Okay. So these two populations are separate. Rarely do we have like intermingling between the populations. But of course, as you all know, birds can get confused sometimes. That's why we end up with flamingos in Wisconsin every once in a while. But for the most part, the whooping cranes in the central flyway are just going to stick to that central flyway. And the ones in Wisconsin are going to stick to Indiana, Alabama, and occasionally like Georgia. We had a few in Georgia this past year. So
there are birds at the Texas coast, but they're coming from the other.
Yes, there are birds at the Texas coast, and there's actually a lot more birds there. So I'd have to pull up the slide with the exact number, but it's closer to the order of like 500. And those, as opposed to the cranes in the eastern migratory population, if you ever go to Texas to see those birds, they're not going to be banded, or very few of them will be banded. So that's kind of an interesting difference between the two populations.
So you said that you could find out if we see one, then you'd be able to tell us which crane it is as well, which whooping crane it is. Do they have names or is it like a number designation?
So the cranes that are raised and hatched and raised in captivity for release in the wild, they do have names. Our team, we don't usually refer to them by their names just because like we're doing data entry, so it's easier to use numbers. So they do have names before they're released, and then sometimes the public chooses names for them and they just get called that over time. So I'm trying to think of some honorable mentions. Last year, we choose naming schemes for the cranes in captivity. So last year, the naming scheme was Jim Henson characters. So we had a beaker released at Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, and their names are chosen before we know the gender. So Beaker was a sweet little girl. It was very funny. Other than that, though, the number system, it's two sets of numbers. So Beaker's number was 1523. That first number refers to the order that the chick was hatched in. So she was the 15th chick to hatch. And then the 23 is in the year 2023. Yes?
So if we report a crane, are we supposed to try to tell you what the leg band colors are to help you figure out who it is?
If you can, that'd be great. If you have a camera that has enough resolution, or if you can get close enough safely to get a photo, you can do it that way. Or yeah, you can report it yourself. It'll prompt you to do that in the report. So the way you would do that, and you can see in this poster here, the bands get very muddy because they're standing in wetlands, so it can be hard to do. But in this situation here, I would say the left leg of the bird is red over white over green. And then the right leg looks like white over, I can't really tell because it's really muddy, maybe red. So yeah, if you can report the bands, that's helpful. But like I said, whooping cranes are territorial. So a lot of times we'll be able to tell from location as well. Yes?
When and how do the wild hatched birds get tagged or banded?
Yeah, so our team goes out and we band them before they're fully fledged, but after their legs are fully developed. Our team, we have crane handling training, and the members on our team have been doing this for decades, years if not decades. So I always say that it's done very carefully and with a large team of people that we go out and we band the birds. And that's also how we determine the sex of wild hatch chicks. So we do that through a small blood draw. Cranes are what's known as sexually monomorphic. So you can't tell the males from the females without blood.
Many of those wild hatched cranes get unbanded, they escape somehow. Your crew's pretty good at.
Yeah, I mean, it can be complicated by like private property. That usually complicates things. So of the wild hatch chicks that aren't banded right now, and off the top of my head, I think there's 3 cranes in the entire population that aren't banded. And in those cases, yeah, it was just that we couldn't get to the property or access them before they fledged. And then once they're flighted, it's a lot harder. So. Anything else? Right, well, that's all. I want to thank you all again for being such a great audience. I have some stickers and some ID guides. So maybe I can leave them on the back table.
Sure,
People
let's
can
leave
grab
them
them
on
on
the
their
back
way
table.
out.
Great.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you,
all.
Alicia. Thank you. Here's what's coming up. This Saturday, if you want to help celebrate Earth Day, Earth Week, we have sunrise on the Buena Vista for the field trip. It's always a beautiful time to be out there, time of day, time of year. They're meeting at 6:30 a.m. at the kiosk on the corner of W and F. Yep, and Rob Pendergast is leading that trip. Also on Saturday, let's see, was that last May that Amber and Janet did a presentation on kestrels? Was that just a year ago? Was that 2 years ago? Anyway, the Eschenbachs have taken over the study of kestrels that Fromm and Hammy Hammerstrom started back in what year?
43 or 4.
Huh?
In the 40s, I think.
Yeah, 40s.
Probably.
And so that is an ongoing study that Alas still supports. And on last Saturday, Janet sent an email saying that she was going to put up new kestrel boxes, and they're on very tall poles, but Figured Hotline hadn't gotten around to mark the spots, so she had to cancel. So it is rescheduled for this Saturday. If you want to go help Eschenbachs, they're going to meet at that kiosk, that same kiosk at 9:45. Or if you go on the field trip with Rob, at 1 o'clock, you can stay on the Buena Vista Marsh and help with Kestrel boxes at 1 o'clock. Bring work gloves, yeah, okay, very good. Other things coming up, Bob Freckman, what's up on the bluff?
Yeah, we have our traditional spring wildflower hike. If you've never seen the display of spring ephemerals, which is so characteristic of the rich sugar maple woods, if you've never seen that, you've never seen spring. And of course, some years you wonder if you're going to see it, but typically about the last week in April to about the middle of May, the spring ephemerals take advantage of the fact that there's light coming through the trees and not yet leafed out. And then if it's a good, healthy woods, the canopy leaves out completely, which eliminates other species and competition. So you wind up during that period of spring ephemeral, just carpets of things in bloom. And one of the best areas in the state is Powers Bluff. So our field trip this year will be the second week, second Saturday in May. I've always have to guess whether it's going to be an early spring or a late spring. And I have a perfect record. I've been wrong every time. So I'm assuming it's going to be a relatively late peak. But anyway, there'll always be something to see. Well, except for those years where we wound up having a snowstorm. So anyway, we'll either meet at Powers Bluff, which is about 2 miles south of Arpin, right about the middle of Wood County at 9 a.m. Or if you want to carpool, we'll meet down at the public parking lot by the river and the bank at 8. So that's the second Saturday in May.
May 11th,
Yes.
very good. That's also another beautiful photo. Keep an eye on the newsletter and the website. We'll have all the rest of these trips that I'm going to mention in the May newsletter. And the website isn't completely updated because we don't have all the details yet. So the next trip after What's Up on the Bluff is going to be banding red-shouldered hawks with Gene Jacobs. And if you're lucky, you have a chance to hold red-shouldered hawk chick. That's happening June 1st. And we don't have the location and times and all those dates, all that worked out yet. So Gene and I got out for the first time today to start scouting nests. We found 3, so that was good. And then we have bison and butterflies at Sandhill Wildlife Refuge. Is it Sandhill Wildlife Refuge or Sandhill? Is it wildlife? It's not a wildlife refuge. What am I saying? Yeah, I guess it's wildlife area. Yeah. Which is near Babcock, Wisconsin. And that is going to be June 15th. So we haven't ever run that trip before. And our friend Brad Baum from Reggie is setting that up. It's a great idea for trip. You're going to learn about the relationship between bison and prairie and Carter blues. We have a little Plover River trip with Terry Hames. He is from the Wisconsin Wetlands Association. He did a program for us about a year ago too. And after the program ended, we kind of talked and he said that he would like to give people a tour of the Little Plover River so you could learn what some of the challenges are. You know, that's the little river that's gone dry probably from irrigation in the area down in Plover. But so it'll be very interesting. I don't know completely what to expect, but I'm gonna help run that trip too. What else? Oh, this Sunday at the Boston School Forest, Alas is going to be there leading birding hikes. to help the school forest celebrate Earth Day. And Tom Pease is also going to be there. So if you want, stop by, see us, bring young ones if you have any. Otherwise, just come yourself. There's always lots to do. That's it. Thanks so much for being here tonight. It was great. And I hope you enjoyed the program. So we have some snacks over here and